So, firstly, I just want to thank Craig and Jon for coming out today. I do appreciate it. So today we're going to be discussing around high-frequency trading, enterprise banking, and everything in between, and the war for kind of cloud-native, open source, and AI talent. Now, for those who follow Craig on LinkedIn, he does an exceptional job of posting about the work that RLS Search does, but I'll let him explain more about that in a moment. So firstly, I think you all met me earlier, but for those who haven't, I'm Ethan Sumner, co-founder and CEO of CommunityStack. I also, by day, work for Barclays, where I lead engineering excellence in the Chief Technology Office. So I'd like to introduce Jon first.
Hi, everybody. Hello. Hi, everybody. I'm Jon Freedman. So I spent 20 years working in technology roles in financial services, last 15 or so on the buy side, which means hedge funds, hiring all sorts of engineers, from people writing code to people maintaining Kubernetes clusters. Really excited to be here today and talk through a bit about what the hiring manager looks for, maybe.
Hi, I'm Craig Whiting. I have a recruitment business called RLS Search, so we essentially source technology talent around the world for predominantly hedge funds. I've been in the industry for 18 years. I'm still hands-on, which makes me a bit of a rarity, and I very much have a view of the market from a perspective of why it's so hard to find good talent, but then also, if you are good talent, why it's so hard to get traction, especially today, which I guess predominantly I'll be talking about. So I won't have the technical detail that maybe you guys will want, but certainly more mechanically.
Awesome. Cool. So we've got 4 questions, and then we'll go to the audience. So the first question we've got is, so the talent market for cloud-native, open source, and AI engineers has become incredibly competitive. I think for those who are kind of looking at a job at the moment, it definitely is at the moment. So from your perspective, what skills are genuinely scarce at the moment, and what companies are over-prioritizing for roles?
Well, at the moment, it feels that there's a limited set of roles because people who are on the market are struggling to get interviews and find their next gig, but also on the other side, getting the right candidate can be a challenge. So what do people prioritize? There's the technical level that you need to be at to pass the interview, if you like. You go into the room or online and get asked to prove that you can do the job. Okay, that's one side of it, but then the premise is there's plenty of people out there who can do the job. How do you differentiate yourself? That's going to take you over the line, get you that offer. And for me, that's always been about communication. And the technical quality, ability, you've got to demonstrate in an interview. Communication, you have to demonstrate in an interview. And when I'm trying to pick between hopefully several qualified candidates for a role, I'm looking at who I think is going to be able to grow into that over time as well. So what do people over-prioritize? To touch on that, it's probably an excessive focus on what we need right now to the detriment of what we don't know that we're going to need in 6 months' time. And that's always what I've come back to when hiring. Who can I find that I'm confident is going to be able to do the thing we don't know we need right now?
I don't think there's so much of a skills shortage. I don't think skills are scarce. You can always find people that have the skills to do the jobs. I think there's an issue if you're a company that are trying to hire and struggling to attract talent. There's an attraction issue. So most people are looking for passive talent. They're not looking for active talent. It's very hard for passive talent that would typically be quite well looked after in their role to understand like a verifiable upside of why they would want to move into a new job, because companies are traditionally very generic and very cookie cutter in how they market their culture. And then also the length of processes, it's more of an endurance sport than anything else now, interviewing for jobs. So if you're trying to attract talent that are traditionally quite well looked after, you're not really giving them much to want to engage you for when your first round is a off-the-shelf tech test and there's no human engagement, and candidates traditionally are or typically are treated as commodities, not as it's not a two-way street. So I think in order to attract more niche skills, you've got to start looking more at process mechanics. The issue for talent in how to be attractive is very difficult. So the issue of hiring these days is you take what is an intrinsically human process. I want communication skills. I want people that can convince me that they're the right person to invest in for what we're going to build in the future. But your processes to find that intrinsically human thing are overtly industrial. It's a huge funnel that tests for raw, quantifiable skills when what you're actually looking for is a qualitative, intangible skill set. So the whole process is set up for like how I recruited in 2008, which doesn't really exist anymore. The other problem with AI is your traditional filtering methods, which are primarily CV, are now largely redundant because everyone just gets AI to write the CV to match the job spec. And the job spec itself now is redundant because what someone's hiring for is what they want to hire in 6 months or 12 months' time, but the job spec is the recycled version of the last time they hired, or they built it with AI. So you've taken the only verifiable method of filtering and made it completely useless. So now if you're an engineer, so what companies now do is they go back to arbitrary filtering. Like I used to work for Goldman Sachs and 3 people in my team used to work for Goldman Sachs. So I'll interview everyone who's applied from Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan or Morgan Stanley, and everyone else is not going to get a look in because I've got too many options and they all look the same. So you end up in this world where it's not meritocratic anymore. The left field candidate doesn't really stand a chance because you just can't get past the arbitrary industrial filters. And actually what everyone kind of wants is a slightly left field person that can think about things a bit differently. So that's the challenge a lot of people face. How to get around that is a long topic, but the scarcity is not really real. It's an attraction issue for companies and a process issue. And then on the candidate side, it's just the rules of how to get jobs has completely shifted in the last 5 years. And everything, and the individuals have largely been left behind in that. And I think that's the gap more than anything else that needs to be addressed. Because your CV is no different than the 250 other ones that all say exactly the same thing. So the trick with CVs now is what everyone's looking for when they hire is so companies used to have limited options when they hired because LinkedIn wasn't a thing. So think of it like Netflix. When you had Sky TV, you had 200 channels, you didn't watch 150 of them, you only watched 50, and you would always find something that you broadly wanted to watch and be quite happy because you had limited choice. Now you have Netflix, and you spend hours scrolling things, and then you watch something you watched before. Unless you have a really verifiable recommendation from someone that you trust. And hiring's the same because of LinkedIn. So everyone can see everyone now. Everyone has their jobs posted directly, and then they use agencies, and then people are like sharing things online and all the rest of it. There's too much noise. So everyone is now hiring like Netflix, where they're hiring on a referral, or they want something they've seen before, which is arbitrary filtering. Because what they're so processes have become, you're screening for you're actively trying to screen people out. You're not actively trying to screen people in. When you relied on a recruitment agency 10 years ago and you had 3 of them and they sent you 15 profiles combined, you were trying to screen people in. You would find someone that was 70% right and you'd give them the opportunity to perform in the room. Now you're trying to find perfect. But the issue is your definition of perfect is intrinsically human. But CVs are intrinsically just raw quantitative data. So the way to write a CV now to get past it is you have to capture outcomes. You have to capture how have you dealt with users, understand what they need, spec'd it out, build something, shipped it, it worked, brought people with you, and shown some self-learning along the way. Like, this is how I do it differently if I did it again.
So basically a set of achievements.
It's a set of achievements, but CVs are increasingly an inventory of skills. But there are skills are everywhere. What people are looking for is an ability to make stuff happen in a way that's going to be positive to the rest of the environment. They want people that can think and can move the needle and can get things done. Like critically, I had like a job, I know I'm really going on now, a job the other day where the whole spec was, I want someone who thinks outside the box. So I'm going, okay, I kind of know how to find that, But if that's their raw criteria and your CV speaks rawly to skills, you're not going to get an interview. And then the interview is the thing that you need and the thing you used to have, and it's the thing you don't really get anymore, because the whole mechanics of hiring it doesn't work in the way companies hire today. It's too industrial to find something that's intrinsically human. It might do, but you're then in the realm of subjectivity of how the reader, whether they like that or not. So you run a little bit of a risk. Also now most screening is done by either AI ATSs or a talent acquisition person that again is only trying to look good to the hiring manager by putting the right people in front of them, so they still go to arbitrary filters anyway. I look at it like, so a great way if you're a technologist looking to stand out is really focus on your GitHub, because everyone's looking at the quality of your code. So traditionally CV, but now, like a friend of mine is in process for a massive role at a massive company, and he was approached 100% based on his Git. They haven't even asked for a CV. So I would recommend if you want to stand out more, go down the route of real world examples of what you can do that can be posted on LinkedIn, they can be on Git, they can be open source, whatever. Reference that in your CV, and then I'd also see it for what it is. The job of your CV is only to get you in the room. That's where you perform. That's where you start to generate value. So you've got to look at it as a funnel. Your LinkedIn profile needs to be a honeypot to make people come and want to offer you jobs. You need to write your LinkedIn for the job that you want, not the job that you have. Your CV, think of it like a shop window. It's the elevator pitch of your CV. Your CV needs to back it up and be captured in outcomes of this is what I can do and have done in a way that is quantifiable. Here's my Git, here's my personal projects. That's going to get you in the room. Once you're in the room, you're there on merit and you're there on you, which is ultimately what everyone's looking for anyway.
The Venn diagram concept I like to use to explain sort of a career progression to people, in that there's 20 million people that you could go and hire to do a particular job. There might just be one seat for them to come and sit in. So how are you going to filter out 19,000,99999 of them? There's going to be subjectivity, there's going to be implicit or explicit bias, unfortunately. But as the candidate, how do you differentiate yourself? I'd even probably say coming to an event like this is like a thing to tick, that a lot of people that I've worked with through the years never go to events. They never do the sort of public, visible side. So you can write amazing code for 20 years for your employer that's never visible to anybody. You can read a load of books that people have written about topics, but never go to an event. And it's about putting yourself out there and being visible, and I think that's what helps differentiate.
Definitely. Yeah, I've seen multiple examples of people, working for organisations 30 years, never updating a CV, and then LinkedIn, and then unfortunately, if one of them gets made redundant or something happens, and it's what do? You've not got that history to show. But no, that's really interesting insight. Thank you. So the next question we've got is, so high frequency trading, hedge funds, fintech, enterprise banking, right? They're all competing for similar engineering talent. Now, I appreciate there's different kind of salary bands within those, but often they have very different cultures, compensation models, expectations. What really does attract top engineers into these environments? And probably not just 3 meals a day fully paid for at Google. It's
Yeah, well, most hedge funds aren't going to give you any free food. There's the intellectual side, I think, for me, and if I flip that around, when I've talked to people about, today's a nightmare, this project's doing my head in, I hate my job. It's like, okay, well, if you come to work for every day for 2 weeks and hate your job, maybe that's the time to start leaving. But there's always going to be good and bad things about where you work. The challenge to attract a candidate is to share enough of what you do to make it sound interesting. And the candidate question of like, what's your typical day like? So, well, the real answer to that is going to be a fair bit of mundane activity and not that much exciting stuff, because that's the typical. What will attract people, I think, is the opportunity to work as part of a group of talented people. And the way that you show that in an interview process is meeting more than just the hiring manager and HR. How do you, as the hiring manager or even the team, how do you articulate what you're doing now and where you're trying to go? The story and the narrative that I gave my department in my last permanent role was that we wanted to allow our business to grow and double in size without doubling our fixed costs. That's not a particularly sexy story. I don't know that anyone's going to put their hand up and say, yes, that's what I want to get out of bed for the next 2 months, 2 years, 10 years and do. But it turns into the underlying driver for these projects. Like, how can we launch a new business quickly? How can we put automation around this part of our workflow so that it scales better? And the reality of most jobs is they aren't all sexy all the time, but if it's intellectually interesting, that should be a big part of it.
I've forgotten what the question was.
Let's repeat it.
Sorry.
No, it's all good. So, high frequency trading, hedge funds, fintechs, enterprise banking, they're all competing for the same kind of engineering talent, but they all have different cultures, compensation models, expectations. What really does attract top engineers?
Speed of process is a big one. Again, it depends on who you're trying to attract. So fundamentally, businesses should be trying to attract passive talent, because typically if people are like really actively looking for a job, without generalizing too much, in a minimum of 50% of the cases, it's normally for an underlying reason. If you want to be able to attract the best engineers, you've got to focus on creating an environment where they understand why it's worth them taking the risk of moving, because when you move, you're losing your political capital and your understanding of the culture, and like, it's quite a risky thing, and it's quite a scary thing as well, because especially now, because all processes are online, which I think is a massive reason why companies are struggling to attract talent, because they don't do interviews in the room anymore. So you're taking an environment where people have human connection, and then you're taking an interview process that's virtual, and then you're asking them to give up everything they have over here for really not much more money to come over here for something they don't fully understand how it's going to play out, and they've got to start again. So it's very hard to attract people to do that, especially when they get counter-offered, which they inevitably will. So I think for companies that want to attract best people, one of the ways you can compete is by having a process that moves quite quickly, but also they haven't got to run a marathon to do it. It's not 10 rounds of interviews with 1 million technical tests that you have to do, and because people still have day jobs, they just don't want to do that. And then to Jon's point, I think you need to meet the person who will be the overall manager, but then you want to start meeting the team, and you want to understand if people are telling the same story and if they see the same vision, and are they all good people. And like, I think fundamentally, especially hedge funds, like, why do people want to work for hedge funds? There's a perspective that the people that work there are really, really good at their job, and you want to work with that team. You want to be upskilled. Like, people don't join hedge funds for money. Like, money is just the material signifier of the value of the organization, how good the people are. People are there because they want to work with great people. The more that you can capture, especially if you're not hedge funds, like, there's great people here and we're trying to do good things, and this is the goal of the group, and then this is how we're trying to get there, and this is how we'd like you to come in and contribute to that, and there's a bit of bandwidth in terms of what that might look like, and we're not going to just put you in a box. That's very good for attraction, and if you can do that quicker than everyone else and with a process that's a bit less arduous, but fundamentally is going to get you to the same point, and that's going to help as well. The other thing that a lot of companies miss is feedback. Like, if you give someone feedback after they interview and you tell them what they did well and maybe where they might improve, they feel more engagement, they feel more valued, so you're going to find that it goes further. Like, this stuff's not massively complex. And then so it's those sort of things, and then it's capturing like what's your culture? Why would someone want to work for you? Why would someone not want to work for you? Because you don't particularly want to attract people that are going to be put off by your culture. So being clear on this is what this team and this group and this business offer you as an engineer. This is what progression would look like. This is how you can still progress but not have to give up being hands-on. A lot of engineers leave jobs because their next promotion will make them a manager, and they want to stay hands-on. So one of the ways, particularly banks, would get better at not losing all their talent to hedge funds would be to give them a route to stay hands-on but still have more money and more scope. Everyone wants more money and more scope because of the world we live in, but not a lot of people who got into the industry because they're engineers at heart, they don't necessarily want to become managers of engineers. So there's a lot of very basic things companies can do that would help them a lot in attracting great talent. But again, it comes back to the concept of like you've got to show what some of the upside is. If you make it this walled off process that's a million hoops to jump, like why would someone who's reasonably well looked after and not looking for a new job even want to talk to you in the first place?
Interesting. And I've kind of seen, kind of like YouTube videos like Jane Street now kind of talk about all their stuff on YouTube, which is quite interesting. And I think you're right, banks and all these kind of organizations showing up and being at community events and hosting them in their office, and it does do well.
We've been for a few years of every company offers exactly the same thing to everyone. I think companies are now realizing that having a culture is a good thing, not a bad thing. And being able to represent that culture to the populace is a good thing because you will attract people that culture appeals to. And fundamentally, you don't want to attract people that aren't turned on by your culture because they're not going to take a job with you anyway. You're going to invest a bunch of time in interviewing them to then not get anything out of it. They're not going to take the job. So it's good to see firms doing more of that. And I personally think that will become a lot more prevalent.
Yeah, no, definitely, I agree. Anything to add, John?
Just going back to my Venn diagram, and with culture and the fit, it's not about discriminating against people. It is crossing off the part of the Venn diagram of people that aren't interested or motivated or going to enjoy working on your whole goal.
Interesting. Cool. So we're going to go on to our third question. So as AI changes how engineering teams build, operate, and automate systems, how do you think the definition of high-performance engineer is changing?
This is the AI question. So,
sorry, I had to sneak it in.
Yeah, it's allowed. I've been in multiple discussions with hiring managers and CTOs about what interviewing in this AI world looks like. And I was thinking about that on the way in this morning. Our initial reaction to AI coding tools was, well, assessing people in the way we used to doesn't make sense anymore. I need to find engineers who are really good at driving AI. And this is like 3 months ago. I think we've changed our minds again, that actually we still need to assess people on the core competency of getting the job done and being productive without AI, but there is an additional skill set that is, I think, undeniably valuable, I believe undeniably valuable, that acts as a force multiplier for your engineering teams to make them more effective, and that is the use of AI. So we saw the demo of AI SRE. Seems pretty useful, right? I wouldn't want to go and tell my SRE team that, sorry, I only want you to do all of that by hand. So what makes a high-performing engineer? I think the attraction of AI coding was on that Venn model of people who are good enough. Well, maybe that part of the Venn diagram's got bigger because people who weren't quite good enough to do it by hand can now use AI. I probably reject that as a model in that, yeah, it's true, and in certain circumstances that helps, and you could say that's what vibe coding is. It's like, here's the thing, you say what you want, magic happens, and then people like me get paid to come in later and fix it. A high-performing engineer, I think, has narrowed, in fact, because it's the people who were high-performing before the magic of AI came on the scene and are able to use it. So I'm a big believer in AI, but underpinned by the skill set and the ability at the start.
I'd completely agree. It's the final 20%. I think the raw technical piece, the build component itself is almost becoming slightly less valuable in terms of raw ability to, like, why is someone a good engineer? But it's once you've wrangled all the different variations of technology, can you understand it from a top-down perspective in a way that's structurally sound, and then you can see where the issues are, and then why aesthetically it's great, but actually when that goes into production, it's going to cause these problems. And probably the commodity now is like either end of that spectrum. So more on the dealing with being able to deal with users and communication skills and being able to understand problems and spec solutions, being able to wrangle technology to help you deliver those solutions, and then on the back end being able to actually make that viable in the real world. So we're seeing, in terms of, like, particularly how funds are now interviewing, they're stepping away from, like, you need to know what you know for sure still, like you're going to get screened technically. But, like, to give you an example, we just placed a guy for a Windows engineering role who was like a Linux multi-cloud SRE, and he had a lot of experience in PowerShell, but he wasn't a Windows engineer. Jobs almost these days are like, this is everything you could do here. So we need you to be able to do some of it and learn the rest. And how testing for that is emerging is much more driven by, like, how can you knit things together and look at it top down and understand how to wrangle technology to deliver solutions rather than be a specialist in, like, one skill, which is very different than how it was, a decade ago. So high performance is much more in your either end of that process, understanding in comms and then being able to actually make it work when it gets to production.
Interesting. Anything to add, Jon?
Well, at the risk of diverging slightly, what Craig was just talking about really made me think about the way I looked at a team as a whole and building multiple roles rather than just one. So when you go and hire for a job, you want to get the best possible person. When you know that you're going to hire 10, 20, 30 people over a short period, the way I used to think about this is some sort of normal distribution. So that model is, there's some people who are definitely not good enough and some people who are amazing, and then this big bit in the middle of people who are good enough. And you, as a hiring manager with a lot of hiring to do, you have an overall budget. So you have to think, well, I know I've got a load of work to do, so I know I need a load of people, and I can't put everybody in the really good bit, and I don't want the other side of that distribution, so I'm going to load up on people in the middle. And with AI as a genuine force multiplier, in theory, if you take the premise that you don't get 20% more productive for a really senior developer, they can be 2, 3, 5 times more productive. That really flips things around, because I can move from this model of going for 10 mid-level hires that costs me this much. Well, why don't I just go for 4 really senior people? Might actually cost me less, and the output that I expect to get is going to be higher. And as a hiring manager and the company paying the bill, that's great. There is the unanswered question of where do we get the next generation of them from? So I advocate now for this mix of senior, expensive, AI-enabled engineers, whatever the actual coding or techie stuff you're doing is, with the junior people as well. So you've gone from this big thing in the middle to what we call a barbell setup, where there's lots on one extreme and lots on the other extreme, and that extreme is really experience.
just that's playing out in real time, where if you look particularly at funds and all the investment going into their junior recruitment, so you look at like NXT at Citadel, for example, and how much money they're spending on and how much money they're paying to young people. Like I spoke to a guy the other day who's on $500,000 and he's been working for 9 months. But then equally at the other end of the spectrum, the compensation for the really capable engineer is like going through the roof, probably correlated to like the return on engineering effort. As a recruitment company that are placing fundamentally the same people, we've seen that our placement values have got significantly higher, but the volume of jobs has got significantly lower. So people are paying less people significantly more because there's a sense that from a productivity perspective, they can just do so much more. And then that middle piece is the thing that's, the AVP come VP Java developer in a bank. Like those roles don't really exist very much anymore and are falling away at a rate of knots. And it's the concept, I love the barbell concept. The junior end is ballooning and then the senior end is ballooning. But senior, crucially, does not mean years of experience. Like, so senior can mean someone who's been working for 4 or 5 years, but has been at the bleeding edge from day one. That person will be considered more senior and will get hired over your 15-year industry vet that's maybe coming out of more of a traditional, approach to work. And there's a question of like, well, how much are they adapting to new technology?
It's always an interesting one. I think having gone into banking myself now, it's more like there's very much hierarchy of the ones who've come through graduates but have been great but not brilliant, who have kind of taken like 15, 20 years to get up to VP. And then someone like myself comes in externally at VP and it's just like, well, you've not been in the industry 20 years and that kind of thing. So it's a very interesting culture that I've seen and witnessed. But cool. So we're on to our last question now, and then we'll have one from the audience. So for organizations that cannot always compete with the highest salaries on the market, what can they do to win and retain exceptional cloud native, open source and AI talent? Now, the one thing I will say is, now funnily enough, pension, that's one thing I've always seen, particularly when recruiting for people previously. One of the first questions I get is, what's the pension contributions? Because some organizations pay 3% and some pay 20%. So it's always an interesting one. But Jon, any thoughts?
It's going to be hard. There's no denying that. And if you put me in that situation, which with some of our clients we do see that don't have a massive budget anymore, how do you win? It has to be the upskilling and the retention, because people always undervalue themselves, and there's an inertia component to this. As Craig was saying, if you move from one role to another, it's not a risk-free change for you, and when you as an employer have limited resources to offer in terms of cash, then you've got to come up with something that is cash that you can really lean into. So what's the purpose of your business? What's your product? Does it have a good story? Come up with some extreme examples, like if you're a weapons manufacturer, people are not really going to get behind that as an altruistic role, right? One of our clients, they're a marketplace for young people to get into, not necessarily into work in a permanent sense, but to get part-time jobs, to start earning money. A big component of the platform is offering financial education and trying to get better outcomes for young people. That's hopefully quite an altruistic and interesting proposition. And it's a completely different access to money, because the amount that you can afford to pay for a role is going to rule some people out who need more for their lifestyle or whatever that means. But where it's enough, that's the target population of people you could employ. How do you convince them that you want to work for them? I'd probably argue the money doesn't really matter. Even if you can pay the highest salaries in the market, you still have the same problem. You've got to convince people to come and work for you, work with you.
Yeah, if you can't compete in budget, then it's going to be very difficult to compete. If you're aiming for the people that are already at the top of the hill, you're just not going to be able to compete, because not that people move for money, but there's as the sole driver, it's very, very rare that money is the main reason someone would take a job. It's much more about people and where they can go. But there is a perspective of like the market, and then if they've got competing offers, that just becomes their version of a benchmark. If I was trying to do that, I would go back to having processes that are more set up to find the slightly left field candidate, or the person who's not all the way there. They're maybe 70% there, and then part of your offering comes training, and we're going to invest in you and we're going to help you get to the next level. And then you maybe swallow that, okay, you make them better and then they're going to move on. So you've got a limited window with that person. But then equally, if you can consistently work with them in that time and understand what good looks like for them in terms of the next 12 months and the next 24 months, and you try and craft a progression route for the individual that seems to be about what they want, you're going to find like retention, it goes significantly higher, because fundamentally people don't like moving jobs. It's not the reason people like me exist, right? It's quite hard to get people to move jobs. So you do have this inertia. I do find, especially in bigger institutions, people tend to get like comfortably unhappy really quickly. So like, you talk to a lot of people in banks, they don't really like their job, but they're quite comfortable and they have a nice pension and they don't really want to move. So you're always going to have that, you're always going to have a natural ability to retain people because of human nature. Why you then maybe lose them is they're worried they start paying a bit of loyalty tax, so comp progression slows down relative to the market. That's the thing that really starts to cause your retention issue. So I would look at, if we're creating a job, let's go for the people that are 70% there. Let's give them something viable to want to be a part of. Let's give them a version of culture and where we're trying to get to. And let's talk to them about how we're going to invest in them and help them learn. And then let's actually do it. But then retention becomes, well, let's keep them moving forward at pace with the new skills we're giving them. If we're going to invest in them, then you've got to take them forward financially, not to the same extent as a hedge fund, but human nature, they want some progression. But also then, as they get better, don't make them a manager if they don't want to be a manager. Talk to them about, what do you want? Because fundamentally, that's why people leave certainly bigger institutions.
Yeah, it's something that for particularly the employer I work at do very well, is that we've started to have a lot more MDs, directors that are just pure ICs, or they have maybe one or two, kind of directs under them. And I think it works quite well. So I think one thing I've kind of seen is that a lot of people want to do empire building, where it's like, let's try and get to your point earlier, is kind of get hundreds of engineers, because then I can say I've got hundreds of engineers and try and make Group Execo, but it's not always the right way.
Most people don't want to like play politics and delegate everything and manage everyone. Like, I think we're going into like the age of the IC. I think the individual contributors are the people that are going to go the furthest in the next few years in terms of contribution and also financially. And everything I'm getting from people that are managers is like, how do I get back to being more technical? Because if you're trying to hire great engineers, the worry now is like, well, how do we have a leader that the engineers respect? So inherently, the leader needs to be deeply technical. And if you're in an institution where you got pushed into management 7 years ago and you're not particularly close to the edge anymore, you're going to struggle to lead ultra hands-on, bleeding edge engineers if that's who you're trying to attract. So this is an interesting thing that companies are really grappling with at the moment. It goes back to attraction, like people attract people. And if it's technically framed, then your leaders need to be technically detailed and be able to articulate it and get people to buy into them.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. So we've got time for one question in the audience. So I think this chap wants to go first. So let me just pass you the microphone.
No, you don't need to speak on the mic.
Are you sure? Oh, we do need it for the camera, unfortunately. So there you go.
This is more of a forecasting question. I think that a lot of things are fundamentally wrong in the process. You're talking about your perspective from a headhunter and a hiring manager. The people that are out there are looking. They are presented with a laundry list of bullet points. I need to have this skill set, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. Right. Now, you hand that over to a person who's going to do the process. And they're just looking, tick box, tick box, tick box, tick box. I can't give this to my manager because my manager will then tell me, why did you put the CV in front of me? Because he doesn't tick all the boxes, or why did you do this? It doesn't quite meet that particular bullet line item. And so therefore, if you're a hiring manager or you are a headhunter, fine, you can go and ask and look for the relationship, what you offer them, and so forth. But the process itself underneath you says, I'm sorry, we have somebody who's a better candidate because they tick more boxes. And then you never get a looked in. Forget the ATS systems and so forth. I'm an employee, and I don't want to look like an idiot in front of my manager. So I'm going to make sure every single tick box is done. So the fundamental question is a forecasting question, is banks or people are realizing CVs are coming in with using AI. And you got done saying, if it meets your job description, bullet for bullet, you know it's AI, you disregard it. So the banks and so forth need to think, well, I don't want to go down the tick boxing, yet I got this employee who's only going to give me a tick boxing process because he doesn't want to lose his job because he's looking incompetent because the CV is wrong. So how long do you think it would take the banks to realize, oh, well, maybe our employees shouldn't do it. Maybe only the hiring manager should do it, or only the headhunter should do it. Or, you know what, we're not going to do the tick boxing anymore.
I hope the very last point is what people ideally should have realized a while ago. So when you put out a CV, a job spec that has 10 requirements, that is unintentionally discriminating against female applicants, because it's hopefully accepted that men will quite happily sort of opt up to their experience, and women won't. So if as Craig alluded to, you're trying to start your bar at 70% and you've got 10 bullet points, all the men who are at 70 are going to tick the other 3, and all the women who are at 70 might not even tick 7 of them. So when I write a job spec and it's in that format, which it tends to be, I want 3, maximum 4 bullet points. So it's like I'm hiring a person who's going to write code, and then they're going to come into my team, and that team has written a load of code in this programming language. So I say I want some experience in that programming language. Then I'm not going to add another 5 bullet points talking about frameworks for that programming language, because it's filtering stuff out.
My fundamental question is the shift in the timeline for screening. So in other words, right now, present day, everybody, all of your employees are saying, look at the CVs, tick, 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 and I'll hand it to my manager. That mindset's got to change. So the question is, how long do you think, given that AI is making all the management pissed off because all the CVs look the same, that you guys need to actually change the JDs, the perceptions, think about things differently? Do you see what I'm trying to get at? Am I making that
I
clear?
think so, and I would again hope that the quality, the efficiency, the effectiveness of a hiring process isn't just measured by percentages. It should be measured by outcomes. So, if I'm in the seat of the boss of the hiring manager, and it's like they went through all of this fight to get their new headcount approved, and it's like, yeah, go for it. I'm not asking them, have you done it yet? I'm asking them, how many of the candidates that you've put through to interview have been good or bad? Like, what are we learning about our process? How do we make it more efficient? And I also really hate this idea of, we found someone that we think is great, but we're not going to make them an offer yet because we're going to see if we can find someone else to compare them against. It's like, just don't do that. The way to measure the efficiency of your hiring should be that you were able to get candidates into the interview process that were good enough, and then you picked one, and then 6-12 months later they're still there. I would reject the box ticking approach.
I think you're right, and it should change. I think smaller companies, particularly funds, are starting to do that already. I would love to say banks one day will catch up. Banks are banks. Like, nobody likes hiring because it's a pain in the ass, frankly. The measure of how efficient is your hiring is how many hours of interviews does your hiring manager have to do to get a good candidate that they like. And increasingly that's becoming, people are like doing 15 one-hour first-round interviews and they're not putting anyone through because all the CVs look like people are great and then they turn up and they're useless. So this is the battle. It completely does need rethinking. If you're somebody who's grappling with this as a candidate and is finding that you're trying to get in the mix for jobs and you're not getting traction because you're falling victim to this industrialized AI tick every box on the sun approach, there are things that you can do. They're not perfect and it isn't a utopia. And recruitment is fundamentally, I would say it's broken because the underlying processes of it do not work. And you'll very rarely meet anyone, whether they hire or whether they're someone who's being interviewed, that will go, I had a great experience. It's always very, very difficult. And this is another reason why talent attraction is so hard, because it's really difficult if you're an individual trying to get a job. So when people come and float jobs under your nose, if you don't really need a new job, you're probably going to go, no, I don't want to deal with that. Hopefully, in an ideal world, people will realize, as Jon has said, that listing a bunch of skills on a job description doesn't help you hire people anymore, and they will start getting them smaller and smaller, and they'll become just the pros that you get at the beginning, which is like, what will you actually do? Not the list of skills, the laundry list that you're being told that you need to bring, because you don't need to bring that stuff. It's just a filtering methodology. If you want to get round it, as I said, you've got to start, and I think maybe Ethan said it, like if you've been writing great code for 20 years but no one has ever seen it, you're not showcasing yourself as an individual. Invest time in things like Git and personal projects and make them open source and let people see what you can do, because you'll be amazed how many hiring managers look at that stuff really carefully, much more than they look at your CV. The second thing is, if you create a LinkedIn profile, like most people write their LinkedIn profile for their peers, fundamentally. They don't write it for recruiters. But why do people use LinkedIn fundamentally these days is to get a new job. So you have to write your profile to understand mechanically who uses LinkedIn. So hedge funds have direct teams, talent teams. All their job is to go and find engineers to introduce the business and not use agencies because it will save them money. And they live on LinkedIn. So if you have a profile that speaks to the jobs that you want to know about, you will find that all these recruiters that work directly for companies and also agencies will just start messaging you all these jobs. But now instead of you're the person applying, you're the person they're trying to reach. So the dynamic shifts. So you might find it's easier to get one of them on the phone. It might be easier to get an email exchange where you're not relying on your CV. You can talk about what you've done and what you do and why you're interested. And you can ask some questions about what it offers. And you could subvert the death spiral of direct apply, which is basically you put your CV in the ether with 1,000 other people and you hope for the best. So there are things you can do. It starts with LinkedIn. You have to use LinkedIn for what it is now. It's a recruitment platform. It's not a social networking site. It's fast becoming Instagram or whatever, so people will probably start moving off of it. But for now, it's fundamentally an opportunity to get job opportunities. So start with that. Then invest in everything outside of the CV, because the CV is not really valuable anymore. And if you do that, you become someone people want to attract and they're trying to reach, not someone who's desperately asking for a look in. And if it all changes, you'll be better for it. And if it doesn't change, you'll be better for it anyway.
Interesting. Thank you very much. So that's a really interesting insight, and I do agree LinkedIn is very much becoming like Instagram. So, but also I think one thing to add is, network and speak to incredible recruiters like Craig, because that's how you build relationships, because you never know when you're going to be on the lookout.
One more thing. So you will have recruiters in your inbox all the time, and most people, when they're not looking for a job, don't respond to them. What you should do is, if you're getting outreach from companies or recruiters with a job that you'd actually like, but you just don't want right now, and the money's right, and the job's the right sort of job, and they've demonstrated like a modicum of intelligence, and they can write something that makes sense. So that will filter out like 70% of recruiters immediately. So you're going to be left, so blacklist the ones that clearly are useless. But if there's someone that looks like they know what they're doing, even if you're not looking, put them on a little file somewhere and message them back and say, this would be the right thing for me, but it's not for me right now. When you get more like this, just shoot it over to me. And then you're going to have, so the challenge a lot of people have is you need a new job. You've just been told your department's being offshored or whatever. You need a new job. You don't know anyone. You can't talk to anyone. What do? Go and look at jobs on LinkedIn, apply, and then never hear anything back, and then get frustrated about it. If you get to that point and you've got a contact book of maybe 3 or 4 recruiters that you already know have jobs that you would be interested in, because recruiters only work one market. Like, I only recruit for hedge funds. So if you're someone who likes a job with a hedge fund and I message you but you're not looking, it's still useful for you to have my number. So when you are looking, I'm going to have more jobs in hedge funds for you. So don't start from scratch. Get a bit of engagement, get a bit of network, go to companies directly, go to events like this. The good thing that's happening now with the CV becoming largely useless is everyone's going back to the human bit. So I can get someone an interview tomorrow if I go to one of my clients and go, this guy's not perfect on paper, but you need to speak to him because of this. And they'll trust me because I've worked with them for years and years. You can't do that directly. Ditto if there's someone in the business already that you can network with. You can say, hey, look, can you get my CV for this role? They will always prioritize it because they're looking for ways to filter people out. So you've just got to adapt a little bit to how you go about the job, and put a little bit more effort in, I guess. Put a bit more out there. But you will find that there's still ways you can create leverage in the process where fundamentally you are the lowest on the totem pole at the beginning.
No, I 100% agree. So thank you very much both for joining us on the panel today. It's been a very interesting insight. And for those who've joined slightly later, the session will be recorded, so make sure to check it out on YouTube. But yeah, so we're going to I appreciate we're slightly overrunning at the moment in terms of time because we delayed a bit at the start. But we're going to have a 15-minute break now. So please feel free to grab some drinks and some coffee, etc. The team will be around if you want to chat. But again, a round of applause for our panelists. Did an exceptional job. Thank you.